Here we go again.
No, not again.
You've been fooled.
How long have we been doing this?
Once more unto the bridge.
And again until we're both dead.
Hello and welcome to You've Seen It Before, movie reviews with connections in mind. Ready Player One is hitting theaters. It is the latest film from director Steven Spielberg. And in this film, it's the story of Wade Watts, a young man who is in Columbus, Ohio in the year 2045, a time in which the real world is a bad place to be. There's really no hope of moving out of what he calls the stacks. And it's a world where most everyone in the world seems to want to escape to a virtual reality game world known as the Oasis. And in the Oasis, the creator of the game world, before his death, hid an Easter egg which can be found through three challenges, and once found, that person will inherit the controlling stock of the Oasis, and essentially will become the world's richest person. Now, this video review will contain certain spoilers of Ready Player One, as well as certain other films and TV series. There will be a full list in the description below. And if you've not seen Ready Player One yet, or any of the films listed below, and want to wait until you have, stop the video at this point and come back later. But with these things in mind though, let's begin. So Ready Player One is not unique in the fact that it is, at its heart, a story about a great treasure that has the potential to alter the real world, and the location of this treasure is hidden through a series of riddles and challenges that can only be figured out by someone who intimately knows the history of the person who wrote them. This is very similar, in fact, to National Treasure, in which the protagonist Benjamin Gates is able to figure out the clues left by the Founding Fathers to the Templar treasure by deciphering the clues that were laid behind through his intimate knowledge of history in that regard. At its heart also in Ready Player One is a commentary on virtual existence, that is, an existence where real bodies don't necessarily matter. What matters is the personality that you can become through an avatar in the virtual world. This sort of issue has been explored in the past with films such as Surrogates, starring Bruce Willis, in which that is a society where people experience the world through their surrogates, these machines that show them their best selves, or the selves that they imagine themselves to be. Both these films also bring up the point that a beautiful woman may show up in either a surrogate form or an avatar form, but in reality they could be a 200-pound man in his underwear living halfway across the world. So there's an interesting comparison there. Finally, plot-wise, this also has an interesting comparison with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, in which both Ready Player One and Willy Wonka feature a younger person who is obsessed with this company who is all around the world, and whose founder wants to pass on the torch to a younger person, and they end up inheriting the keys to the kingdom, as it were. And in this case, it is Wade Watts in Ready Player One, and Willy Wonka, it is Charlie Bucket, who both of these characters are also from poorer sides of the family, and they essentially see this contest as their only means of getting out of their terrible existence, so to speak. Now, in Ready Player One, there's also a scene in which the characters, our main protagonists, fool the villain, played by Ben Mendelsohn, into thinking that he has exited the Oasis in the real world, and only to find that Wade is pointing a gun at him, demanding to know where Artemis is being held. But we, the audience, know early on that it is in fact a simulation trying to fool him into revealing that information, and he eventually figures that out through small discrepancies. Now, this is similar to Star Trek in many ways. Another YouTuber, Jeremy Johns, pointed out that this is similar to Star Trek Insurrection, However, this sort of thing has also been used earlier in Star Trek's history, mainly the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Ship in a Bottle, in which the virtual hologram character Moriarty, who gains sentience, fools Captain Picard, Data, and Lieutenant Barclay into believing that they're on the real Enterprise, when in fact they are in a holodeck recreation, and at one point Captain Picard is fooled into giving up his command codes to Moriarty, and then essentially Moriarty gains control of the Enterprise, the real Enterprise in that regard. Now, really quick, a couple of interesting mechanical similarities that you may have seen before. In Ready Player One, we've seen a couple of times throughout the film that real-world movement can impact movement in the Oasis world, such as the scene near the end where Wade Watts is suspended in a motion rig inside a moving van, but when that van is being rammed by other SUVs, the jostling back and forth inside the real-world van has consequences inside the virtual world. And of course, hilarity ensues in that regard. This is sort of reminiscent to how the pin technology worked in Tomorrowland, in which real-world movement can translate to difficulties in the virtual world, even though all you see is the virtual world. When a real-world obstacle comes up, such as falling down a flight of stairs, then you see that that movement in the real world translates into the virtual world to sometimes detrimental results. And finally, of course, just a little homage. I'm sure many people picked up on this, but if the credit font looked familiar, how it was displayed, you may have, of course, seen that as an homage to Back to the Future in its opening and closing credit fonts. Another Spielberg property, even though Spielberg did not actually direct Back to the Future, he was merely a producer on that. Small nit to pick, but another fun Easter egg as well, and a movie full of fun Easter eggs. Now, with all this being said, of course, the big question is, should you go see Ready Player One if you haven't already and have made it this far through the video with all these spoilers? I would say, yes, it is definitely worth seeing, especially on the big screen. This is definitely a spectacle film. This film has a lot of great set pieces. It moves at a pretty decent pace, even though it is kind of exposition heavy in the beginning. I don't think that there were many stall points in this film. However, the one thing I will say is sort of a letdown is that while the Avatar personalities and the animated characters that we see are really engaged in as an audience, when we switch back to the real world equivalent people behind these avatars, that's when the film, I feel, kind of is sort of a letdown, because as characters, Wade Watts and Samantha, the person behind Artemis, they're not really fleshed out very well, and they're kind of one-dimensional in that regard. I feel like they have more depth as avatars, and even then, it's not all that much. This is really more of an adventure film where you're not necessarily caring so much about the characters per se, rather than the adventure that we're being taken on through the 3 challenges towards the Easter egg that Halliday left behind. And in that regard, I would say it is worth it, but I would say it's not the best film in that regard. And also, the one big question that I'm sure many people have going into this film is, how heavy are the references in this film? This film does not hide the fact that it is very much pandering to the 80s nostalgia, as well as properties from Steven Spielberg in this regard. And in that regard, I would say it toes the line. It does not go over the line in that regard, but there are moments where references are sort of in your face, and I would say in that regard, it just gets a little too thick in that regard. Not necessarily depleting from the joy that I come from seeing these references on the screen. I just feel like, let's not just stop and say, hey, it's that. Come on, let's just kind of keep it as an Easter egg and move on. I definitely did not see all the Easter eggs for the first time through. You will probably want to see this multiple times if you're really into catching each and every reference that goes into it. But at that point, I would say it's probably better to wait until it comes out on home video and just where you can have a pause button and just kind of soak up everything, every little scene in here, because there's so much to see in this world that you can't see on the first time through. So that all in all, I would say you should go see it on the big screen at least once, but this is not something you should necessarily run out to see. It's not necessarily Spielberg's best, but I would say if you've been waiting for Spielberg to return to the big scene spectacle film, like Jurassic Park, like a bunch of other his films, like E.T. of course, then definitely go see this film if you wanted to see that. So there you have it. There's my review of Ready Player One. I appreciate whatever audience I can get, and I will try to fill whatever time space that I will have between now and late April when Avengers Infinity War comes out. So thank you all for watching, and just remember, there's nothing new under the sun, and yes, you have seen it before.